I don't know how you define mission, but this morning I want to try to define what it means to be mission or on mission. And certainly this week we've seen a little bit of that with the Olympics. Did you know the Olympics were on? Everything else seems to have halted while the Olympics are on. If you're a sports fan, there's no Major League Baseball, there's no WNBA, there's nothing. There's not even NASCAR, right? There's the Olympics. And if you enjoy watching the Olympics, then there's a lot of things to watch. And I enjoy watching the Olympics. I enjoy the competition and the stories and all the things that go with it. I enjoy listening to the way people got to the Olympics, how they actually achieved what their goal was, or their dream or their hope of actually competing at the Olympics, their setbacks, their struggles, their failures, all those things, and then you get to see them hopefully achieve their ultimate goal in winning a gold medal or whatever at the Olympics. And I was a little bit disappointed that the men's USA team was playing at 8:15 this morning, because I do enjoy watching the men's basketball team play, but I really enjoyed watching Canada play yesterday in the men's basketball team. So the Olympics are on, and they're everywhere. And people are competing, and some people, or most of those people, have been on a mission for a long time. A mission to compete at the next Olympics. The next Olympics is in California in 2028, just in case you plan on going or being there. But I was caught by this story of the South Sudan. Now, South Sudan has only been an independent nation for 12 years. The country has struggled with conflict and humanitarian disasters, and this summer, this Olympics is the first time they've put together a men's basketball team. Now, if you don't follow the Olympics and you don't follow basketball, you wouldn't know that South Sudan almost beat the U.S. men's team in the preliminary basketball games. Now, if you don't know about the USA basketball team, they are all NBA players. They're all superstars. They're all amazing. South Sudan does not have, well, they have one player that used to play in the NBA. And this young man, Clarkin Jones, is 26. He's a Christian. He was born with a brain condition. And eventually that led him to having to stop playing competitive basketball. And he did play in the NBA for a number of years. But he plays for South Sudan. And he praises all of his success to God and his faith in Jesus as he competes for South Sudan in the Olympics. Or maybe you have heard of Olivia Lundman. She's from Canada. She's 21. She's participating in her first ever marathon walk race mixed relay. Don't ask me what that is, but it's a walk race relay, just like there's a running relay. You're walking. So if you're a walker, maybe you would get that. If you're a racer, maybe you'd get that. So there's a technique to the walk race that you have to do. Anyway, she's 21. She has struggled with mental health, and she has been a long advocate for mental health and her faith. And so she was sharing about her faith in a sermon recently where she goes to church. That prayer, as Bill said, really helps her with her anxiety and her depression. And there's two among many other Christians that are competing in the Olympics, hoping to reach their ultimate goal of winning. But when it comes to our stories and how we understand mission, it's complicated. We don't really, we've understand mission for a long time, but when it comes to the church and mission, we often think of those people or those agencies that feel God's call to leave their home and their families and their country and their jobs and move to a far-off country where they have to learn a new language and a new culture, where the amenities that we have in North America don't exist. And those are missions or missionaries. And that's the way that we've often defined that. And in fact, as a young boy, I remember a missionary coming to our home church. And I remember it was something special because it was an evening event. And my parents didn't go to evening events at the church. And I thought, this must be quite amazing. And we went, and I was just struck by his stories of what he was doing in jungles far away and how people were coming to faith. And I thought, one day, I want to be just like him. I want to be a missionary. I want to go and see the world and travel and see what God can do far beyond, the small town that I grew up in. And eventually I did get to go. I went to Ireland for a summer, and as I was preparing to go, I only had about 2 months to raise funds to go. And I actually didn't raise all the funds. And I called the team lead and I said, you know what, I don't think I can come. I don't have the money. He's like, don't worry, just come, fly to Colorado, come to the training, God will look after it. I was like, okay, but I'm well short of all the funds that are needed. He said, don't worry about it, just come. And by the time I landed in Colorado for training, all the funds were taken care of, and off I went to Ireland for an amazing summer. But I grew up in the church, and I was involved in youth group and church camp, and I believe that missions was something that was very specific to a small group of people. The word mission or missions has to do with very different things, doesn't it? Most of us think of missions as something that other people did, that other people went on, that other people were qualified for, dedicated to, and the rest of us, norm or ordinary people, that wasn't for us. That the way that we supported or helped missionaries was to pray for them and to support them financially, but that was as far as missions would ever go. Maybe you would experience a missions trip, and I know Val is working hard to get to the Dominican Republic next year, and maybe we will, and maybe you haven't even thought that you should go. Or maybe you've never thought about being active in mission. That's a CBM video, and they're being active in missioning, and they're asking us to be active in mission in our life. It's been long-standing in North America that missions was defined this way. That missions were about those people that went, that small group of people that were dedicated or skilled or had the call from God to go, and the rest of us were not. And therefore, we weren't about God's mission or missionaries. But a couple weeks ago, I talked about God and how we see and understand what God is up to in our world. That sometimes it's hard to see how God is at work in all the turmoil that's around us. Where is God at work in his mission in the world? And we see this most clearly in mission. Something less clearly in our everyday, ordinary lives sometimes, but sometimes we get a glimpse of what God is up to. And we see this most clearly through the life and ministry of Jesus. And since we see it most clearly through the life and ministry of Jesus, it begs us to think a little bit differently about mission and our mission and how we're involved in it. That everyone and each one of us are called to mission, to be about God's work in the world. And when we look at Jesus' life and ministry, we see that every person, every one of us is called to be on mission. So what does that look like for us? How do we need to change the way we think about the word mission or missionary? It drastically impacts who we are and how we live. For many that have been called to missions as their primary concern, early on it was all about making sure that the gospel was being spread, that the good news of Jesus was being shared. that people were learning new languages and translating the Bible into new languages and focusing on the salvation of people. And that was how missions was defined. And then people came along like Jane Buchanan, and she was really concerned about education and human rights in India. In 1876, she began the Women's Baptist Foreign Missionary Society of Ontario West. She launched a periodical called the Canadian Missionary Link. She advocated for different things. She wanted to help those that were hurting. She wanted to educate women. She wanted to help stop the practice of sati, where widows were burned alive at the funerals of their husbands. That was the common practice in India. Can you imagine? I can't. She advocated and wrote articles for the untouchables. And she believed that the welfare of people was just as important as sharing the good news of Jesus with people. Long before the term integral mission ever was coined, Jane and others saw the need to help those in need and to share the good news of Jesus as they went and did practical work with their hands and feet. And today, the phrase integral mission or word deed is something that CBM uses in just about every article and everything that they do. A way to describe missions, a way to describe how they go about their work. This morning in the Gospel of Matthew, we'll look at a few words that Jesus comments. He's being challenged by the Pharisees, and he comes back to the greatest commandment. The Pharisees are trying to catch Jesus in a bit of a trap to prove that he's not the Messiah, that he is not the one that he's not the one to be trusted or followed. And Jesus knows their plan at this point, and he's ready for them. He's ready to defend what they have to question them about. And Jesus says these words in Matthew 22:34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. If we were to flip over to the Gospel of Luke, the expert of the law wants to justify his living, and Jesus confirms this same thing. He answers the expert in the same way. There is only one commandment, love God and love others. And he takes those two commandments and he puts them into one, combines the two into one. Love God and love your neighbor. Doing this fulfills the law that's written. How is this practically looked in our lives varies, obviously. How do we share the good news with our neighbor? How do we love our neighbor? How do we help those in need? How do we help those that are struggling with everyday issues? Sharing the good news and showing the good news of Jesus is deeply important. Sometimes it's so ingrained in our Western culture that the best thing and the only thing to do is to use our words, is to preach and share the good news. And what the world outside is looking for us to do is to show the good news through our actions and our efforts. CBM writes about how this was so divided in their own organization that at one point they had different wings at CBM, different buildings. They were separated, and one wing was for evangelism and reaching the lost in mission, and the other wing was for social reform and education and renewable farming, and the two were never to meet until today. If you were to go to CBM, and Val would be able to testify about this, they very much work together. Integral missions of sharing the good news and living out the good news through renewable practices and education and social reform is the very heart of how they do mission and how they go about their work in every part of the world that they're in. So how do we love God and share the good news at the same time? How do we use our hands and our feet along with our voice in integral mission and word deed? That we can no longer just allow missionaries to go about and do this. That we as a church, as Christians, need to go about doing this. And sometimes we get to see this through Olympic athletes. Those that get interviewed and win, and they give God all the glory through what they do. But sometimes integral mission goes far beyond just our words and our actions. It penetrates the very fiber of our being, everything that we're about, everything that we are, to recognize that God is in control and wants to be a part of every part of our life. CBM has partnered with a group called the Micah Network, and they say this about what it means to share the good news by word and by deed. That sharing the good news of Jesus has social consequences, even in our Canadian context. And our social action has evangelistic consequences as we help those in need. When we love people, when we walk with people, when we're called to follow Jesus and turn from our sin, it has consequences in our world today, even in Canada. The church is at its best when it's about God's mission in the world, about being and doing and saying. The church is at its best when we are not only praying and supporting, but called to be a part of it, to be involved in it. That those that we partner with in mission are part of our church family. Whether it's going on a sent team to the DR with Catherine Scott, who is one of the missionaries we support. And I don't know if you know Catherine, but it's time to know Catherine. It's time to make sure that she feels part of our church family. Not that we just support her financially, that we're praying for her, but we want to be involved in the ministry that she's doing in the Dominican Republic. Or maybe you know Janice and Bill Dick, and they've been to our church a number of times. They still work from Calgary, but they train pastors in Bolivia and around the world. How do we as the church be about the mission that they're involved in? Helping them train pastors and leaders all over the world to share the good news, to be the hands and feet of Jesus all over the world. And of course, it comes to, well, how do we be the hands and feet and the voice of God in our city? How do we love our neighbors? How do we help those in need? How do we help those that are just coming to Canada for the first time? Integrating their lives into a new culture and a new society. How do we live out integral mission in our lives and in the church? Maybe it starts just with praying for Catherine and the Dicks. Or maybe it's about getting a little bit more active. I don't know about you, but I could be a little bit more active in my life. And that's what the video was all about. So people were raising funds for missions by being more active. Sounds simple, doesn't it? So if you wanted to sponsor yourself or somebody else, you could walk a little bit further. You could swim or you could bike. And we did this last year. There was a whole bunch of us that got together and said that we were going to do X, Y, Z, and people sponsored us to do activity, to be active in our lives. And some of those funds actually stayed in Canada. And Val applied for some of those funds to help with the gleaners. But all over Canada and all over the world, those funds were being used to help projects, feed people, house people, clothe people here in Canada and all over the world. So Wednesday, when you go to the barbecue, take a little bit of extra money with you because it's all going to CBM's Active in Mission. That's what the barbecue is all about on Wednesday. Raising funds, supporting CBM and their work. But it goes far beyond that. It goes beyond that in our own personal lives. We have one more month in August to be active in mission. So you could go online easily to CBM. You can join a team that's already active. You can start your own team. You can start the First Baptist Church Active in Mission team. And you could pledge to do something. I thought about this and I thought maybe this would be a good way to be more active in August. To walk 100 kilometers in the month of August. That doesn't sound like a terribly lot, but it's about 3 kilometers a day. So if you miss a day, that's 6, right? If I'm thinking, if I missed a couple of days, then that's a lot of walking, but it's doable. All in the effort to raise some funds for CBM and what they're doing. And certainly we want to be praying for CBM and the work that they're doing. We want to think about, okay, when it comes to September, what does it mean to be integral in mission for First Baptist Church? When all the summer vacation plans are done, when all the family have left, when everybody's back to normal and everything's back in school, everybody's back in school, what does it look like for us to be active in mission in the city of Penticton? How do we help others in need? Maybe it's driving people around to church or to the grocery store. Maybe it's making some freezer meals for those that are in need. Maybe it's just a phone call and checking on people that we don't even know. There's so many ways, so many ordinary, everyday ways that we can help each other and be active in mission and be a part of the church that we're called to be. I don't know what that will look like for you. I'm not really sure what that will look like for me. I didn't sign up to walk 100 kilometers in August yet, because it's not August yet. I'm still praying and thinking about what that looks like for me. But it would be a challenge, something different, something new, something that will challenge me physically, but spiritually and mentally as well. Maybe that would be something that you want to be involved in. Maybe it's using the wonderful kitchen we have on the other side of the building to cook something, to make something. Maybe it's starting a class in the fall and being the teacher and leading people in a study. I don't know what that looks like for you. But I challenge you to think about that, to pray about that through the month of August, or at least until August, and then maybe take the next step. I never thought that I would be a missionary. Well, there was a time that I did think I would, but most of the time I thought I would be a farmer. Well, that didn't really work out for me. And I wanted to be a missionary. And when I came home from Ireland, the team lead said, yeah, absolutely, you can come and join the organization. You need a bachelor's degree in education, and you need to get married. Those were his requirements. I said, well, I could probably get the education part, but marriage, I didn't have any prospects at the time. And anyway, I was struck by, they wouldn't let me join the team. I was so ready to go. I also went to the church that I grew up in, and my grandparents went to that church, and I asked them for some help financially, and they said no. I was turned down. I was defeated. They didn't want to support me because I wasn't going with a denominational organization. And I could have easily walked away and been defeated and been done with the church and missions, but I wasn't. God wasn't done with me. And sometimes we need those challenges in our life to say, okay, God, what are you really doing in my life? How are you really working in my life and directing me? And because of those things, I kept asking questions and kept wondering, okay, God, there's got to be something else going on here. And slowly and surely, yes, he directed me and moved me in different directions. But don't be defeated if one thing doesn't work out. Keep trying. Keep asking. Keep seeking. How are you? How are I trying about being in God's mission, being active in God's mission in this world? That's my challenge to you this morning. Let's pray together. Father God, we thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the challenge that brings to our lives, not just by speaking your word and sharing the good news, but by living it out in everyday, ordinary ways. And Lord, even in Canada, we struggle with that because people don't want to hear about our faith. Give us boldness and clarity, Lord, in how to do that well. Give us love and compassion for those that don't want to hear it. Lord, we ask that you would give us clarity in how we can be active in mission as your church today. In Jesus' name, amen.